Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our first ever Hindus for Human Rights virtual open house. Really excited that so many people were interested in joining. We'll start with some introductions. I'm Stravia, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Hindus for Human Rights. Then I'll pass it to Ria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ria. I'm the Senior Policy Director for Hindus for Human Rights and also the Director for Hindus for Human Rights Action. I'll pass it off to Vivek.
Hi everyone, I'm Vivek. I'm an organizer with Hindus for Human Rights, based in Berkeley, and support all of our members and programming in the American West.
Thanks. So with that, we're gonna get started. We're going to give a relatively brief presentation, or we'll try to make it brief, but we really want to use most of this time for folks to ask any questions that you might have ever had about HFHR, questions about how to get involved, and we'll keep it to an hour. So So, what is Hindus for Human Rights? Obviously, all of you have heard of it, but we're an organization that was founded in 2019 primarily to provide a Hindu voice of resistance to caste, Hindu nationalism, and other forms of bigotry and oppression, especially when they were being perpetrated in our name. We felt that there was a need to speak out with strong Hindu values against atrocities that were happening to other communities in the name of Hindus. And so we operate from a place of a few core values: Shanti, which is peace, Nyaya or justice, and Satya, which is truth. And if you see on the side there, that's our UK affiliate and our UK director, Rajiv, and he's at a protest against the far right in Britain, and he's holding our sign with those values. And our vision is a world defined by Loka Sangraha, or universal common good, where there is peace among all people and our planet is honored and protected.
So, um, so much of what we are talking about as HFHR, as Sravia alluded to, is atrocities happening in the name of Hinduism against other communities. And that is, of course, the threat of Hindu nationalism. We often talk about this in very abstract ways, but it really has real life consequences for people in India and even in the diaspora, including for Hindu Americans. So in India, we see that particularly minorities, Muslims and Dalits, are vilified, they're attacked. There is currently a question about, is there a possible attack on Muslims in Delhi during Eid celebrations that we've been seeing online right now? It includes also the repression and silence of government critics, critics of Hindu nationalism, and the press, because Hindu nationalism requires that so much of the pluralism that we see, not just in Hindu society, but in Indian society, be flattened into this one idea of what it means to have, what it means to be Indian. And so, because of that, the Indian government has become increasingly autocratic. Um, and perhaps the most dramatic way we see this in India is Muslims being pushed out of India, physically being pushed out. Over the last year, we've seen hundreds of Bengali-speaking Muslims, whether they are Indian or not, um, and Rohingya refugees being pushed into Bangladesh. Rohingya refugees also being pushed out into the Indian Ocean as part of this effort to make India a Hindu nation. In the diaspora, what this looks like is a lot of trolling, in-person intimidation of academics and journalists to stop the critique of Hindu nationalism, to stop the critique of the Indian government. At the White House, a journalist who is Indian American and Muslim asked about the human rights record of Narendra Modi. She was trolled viciously for weeks to the point that the White House had to actually comment on it and condemn this kind of trolling. We see that Muslims at Indian community gatherings are intimidated. They feel increasingly less welcome in broader Indian spaces. And this includes like images of bulldozers at India Day parades, um, giving a clear message to Muslims, that Indian American Muslims, that they are not welcome. And this doesn't just happen in the US, this happens in Canada, it happens in the UK and Australia. And the last thing is that anyone who criticizes the government of India is often repressed by actors living inside India, including the government or political parties. This has included conspiracy theories and press conferences about our executive director, Sunita Viswanath, as well as the most dramatic versions of this, which was the attempted killing of an American citizen and the murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil because of their criticisms of the government of India. On top of that, this is a very challenging time, right? So right now, we're primarily, not primarily, we're largely a community of color. So many Hindu Americans are immigrants. And so we see these threats to so many immigrants across the US. And oftentimes, related to that is this racializing of everyone who's not Christian. And so we are targeted in places like around the country for being not Christian, but also being visibly brown. And that means that our communities are undergoing threats. Those threats, by the way, are not separate from Islamophobia that we see bubbling up in the US. When lawmakers say that there is no place for Muslims in India, they're also often, or Muslims in the US, they're often also saying implicitly, but sometimes even explicitly, there is no room for Indians in the US. There's no room for Hindus in the US. And this is all because white Christian nationalism is a dominant strain in our politics in the United States today. Many Hindu Americans and Indian Americans are experiencing caste discrimination. This is something we're talking about a lot more openly in our communities, but it's also because I think we're we're finally at a place where there are more people coming from South Asia from diverse caste backgrounds. And unfortunately, it also means that the systems of oppression that we've seen in South Asia, those social dynamics come here. But it also means that it is our duty as Indo Americans to find ways that our community is welcoming for everyone within the Hindu American community, regardless of caste, and that we can build a model for other South Asian communities as well. We, as Sravya said, we want to talk about like what it means to be a progressive Hindu, and that means we have to be very credibly progressive and Hindu across South Asia. Not every Hindu American, not every Hindu is Indian, not every Hindu is South Asian. But for us, that also means talking credibly about minority rights in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and across wherever there are South Asians, wherever there are Hindus, to make sure that we're credibly not just talking about what we're not just credibly talking about what we have a responsibility as a dominant community to do, but in places where we are a minority community or where there are other minorities who are affected by the dynamics of majoritarianism. And the last thing that we are all dealing with, and I think in the US we feel it acutely over the last 2 years, is the threats to democracy itself. In India, the US, other South Asian countries, these threats are often the same or similar in all of these countries. And so the more we learn about democracy in India or in South Asia, the better we can address it here in the US and vice versa. Um, and as we have said, I think many times already, we come from a place of saying that so many of the atrocities happening, particularly in India, are being committed by people who say they are doing it to protect the name of Hindus. And we don't agree with that. Instead, we think that if Hindus organized to stand up against these atrocities committed in our name, rooted in the values of our faith, we can delegitimize Hindu nationalist claim to speak for the Hindu community. And we really believe that because we know that the data exists among Hindu Indian Americans that most Hindus are not for Hindu majoritarianism. They are concerned with it. They're concerned about caste discrimination. So our goal is to bring this majority together to delegitimize Hindu nationalist belief or their insistence that they are the Hindu community. And so we have three ways to do this, right? So a lot of it is what I do, which is the policy work. We have our cultural work, which is a lot of what Stravia does, and then the comms to communicate all of what we do to all of you and bring you in. So we work with lawmakers across countries and at the federal, state, and local level to talk about human rights and religious freedom issues in South Asia and North America. And we want to make sure that we're doing so with a duty of care to people living in South Asia, but also to Hindu Americans here in the US. So we're not kind of using people's causes for some as a prop, but that we are really advancing the human rights and religious freedoms of Hindus and of other communities in the places we focus on. We also work with human rights activists and journalists in India, and we try to make sure that people who are, detained or harassed in South Asia their cases are known internationally. So one of the things that we've been working on is continually raising the cases of people like Umar Khalid, Sharjeel Imam, the Father Stan Swami, to both make sure that these people can, well, in the case of Father Stan, that we remember him, and in the cases of, say, Umar Khalid or Sharjeel Imam, that we can fight for them to get bail by bringing international pressure through our work and through the networks we have to the Indian government to release people like these on bail. And then the last thing we have been doing is lobbying for bills that support human rights. Um, we're currently part of a large group of human rights organizations lobbying for the Transnational Repression Policy Act, which could materially help a lot of people undergoing repression from foreign governments. All this does is give a definition of transnational repression so that the government has a way to address this issue without just relying on the police or relying on the Department of Homeland Security to deal with threats from foreign governments, but also so that all of you, if you feel intimidated by any foreign government, you can go to the US government and say, I feel intimidated. You can go to your member of Congress if you want and say, I feel intimidated. What can I do? And then they can say, here's what you can do. And here's how we are legally obligated to keep you safe.
Okay, so another bucket of work that we do and that is growing is our religious and cultural work. And through this work, we really try to uplift progressive and social justice oriented ways of being Hindu. Obviously, many of us might be familiar that caste discrimination and patriarchy are problems in terms of how our tradition is practiced and how it might be conveyed in our community. But there are lots of traditions, whether it's Advaita philosophy or whether it's the traditions of Bhakti saints, that really promote social justice. And we try to uplift that through our religious work. One example, and some of you might be the recipients of this already, is we put out an annual progressive Hindu calendar and we commission art pieces every year for that calendar. So each month, each year has a different theme. This theme is deities that represent queerness or queer ideas. So we have deities that are worshipped by the trans community, deities that express queerness in their stories. Next year, we're thinking about maybe doing something related to Shakti. Haven't quite decided yet. But we've done another calendar that was on deities worshipped by refugee and migrant communities. And this is a very popular calendar. It even includes important dates in South Asian political history. We usually sell the original art pieces at the end of the year as part of our gala auction. So that's one of our initiatives. Another one of our initiatives is a lot of interfaith events. We hold inclusive and interfaith religious and cultural events. Last year, if you look on the picture on the side, this is an event that I organized in Oregon called Yugadi Eidster, because Yugadi and Yugadi is, for those of you who don't know, Hindu Telugu Kannadiga New Year. So we worked with a mosque and we worked with the church to organize this big celebration called Yugadi Eidster with performers and food and opportunity for our different communities to meet each other and celebrate together. This last weekend, there was an interfaith holy celebration in Australia, which was super exciting and cool. And another initiative that we have is every month, we organize Betux for Liberation. And these are webinars that discuss topics related to social justice and Hinduism. Last month, there was a Betuk on migrant justice and Hinduism. So, what does Hinduism have to say about refugees and immigrants? We have another Batak coming up this month. That's with Anantanan Rambachan, who is a Hindu theologian. He is on our advisory board and he writes a lot about social justice and Hinduism, Hindu liberation theology, and he's going to be talking about his new book, The Way of the Sant. We've done bed talks on caste, yoga, gender, LGBT rights. So those happen on a regular basis, and we're hoping to do more of that programming. So this is just our example. As I mentioned, you got the Eidster. We partnered with a temple, mosque, and church to organize this great event. And then another area is our community organizing as well as comms work. So we have 11 US-based chapters, and what a chapter is basically an organized group of people. When there's a lot of members in a particular area, they might decide to form a chapter, and that means that they're usually meeting about once a month to hold discussions, events, work on organizing projects. And in addition to our 11 US-based chapters, we also have two international affiliates, one in the UK and one in Australia. And so they also do their own events, programming, organizing based on their needs. And the idea of these projects is really to help folks organize within their local communities, both to address what Hindus, what other South Asians in the community are dealing with, and also to address Hindutva as it's coming up in their local communities, you know? If people are concerned, hey, this like very Hindu nationalist person just got this appointment on some board or commission, that chapter might raise awareness about that to local officials and say, hey, this person is affiliated with the Hindu nationalist organization. You know, we have some concerns here. So that's an example of a project that a chapter could work on. Some of them are more, more casual. They might meet up for just discussions once a month. Some of them might be interested in doing interfaith work and organizing interfaith events, but it really depends on the chapter and what the chapter is interested in. One project that we're doing in a lot of chapters right now is what's called the Atiti Devo Bhava project. So some of you might be familiar with this expression. It's usually translated as the guest is God, but Anantanand Rambachan actually says that a more accurate translation would be the stranger is God or someone you don't know is God. And so we use that kind of as a metaphor for why we should be taking care of our immigrant neighbors. And so this project basically is creating know your rights support and training for our immigrant community. And that's mostly a Hindu community, but it's folks from other religions as well. And we've partnered with mandirs, we've partnered with Indian community centers in order to hold these trainings in local communities. And these trainings, they usually have the standard know your rights information you might get somewhere else, but there's also a lot of information that's South Asian specific. So information on H-1B visas, information on international students and best practices for international travel. So a lot of what we do is, give presentations. We have Know Your Rights materials or cards that we've distributed to several mandirs. So that's all part of that project. And then we also will have solidarity events, letters. One of the things we do is, say that there's a school or there's a city and they're trying to pass a law against or a law against caste discrimination. We might write a letter and say, hey, we're Hindus and we support that letter to ban caste discrimination. The reason we do that is because oftentimes what there are groups, say, of Dalit activists who are trying to pass a ban on caste discrimination, and you have right-wing Hindu groups that say, hey, that's anti-Hindu. So we're here to say, no, that's not anti-Hindu. One of the beliefs in Hinduism is God is in everyone, and if God is in everyone, we have to be against caste discrimination, and we are Hindus who recognize that. And so we write those letters when sometimes there's professors and they're challenging Hindu nationalism, in talks and their research in the classroom, they get attacked by right-wing groups. So we can organize and speak out and say, hey, it is perfectly fine to talk about Hindu nationalism. This is a problem. We recognize it as a problem. So on the side, you have an example of one of our Know Your Rights trainings. This was at a temple. It was for New York. It was in New York, and it was for Krishna Janmashtami. And Krishna Janmashtami is particularly symbolic, of course, because Krishna was born in a prison, in a dungeon. So there was some symbolism we tied into that training. And so in the works, and we can't really talk too much about some of this because we are a 501(c)(3), so we don't engage in electoral activity. We engage in very, very limited lobbying activities, but we do have a sister organization, Hindus for Human Rights Action, which Ria mentioned she's leading. And that has the ability to get engaged more in the electoral political process. So if you're interested in learning more about that, maybe Ria, if you want to pop your HfHR action email in the chat, people can reach out. Samadarshini is a project of the 501(c)(3). That's what we are, Hindus for Human Rights. And Samadarshini is an initiative to bring Hindu religious leaders together and really try to promote, both like find and also promote teachings in Hinduism that promote social justice, and also think about what it would look like to revise rituals, to revise practices, pujas, etc., to make them anti-caste and to make them gender inclusive. What does a progressive Hindu wedding or a funeral look like? What do these practices look like without caste and patriarchy? And in the long run, we really are hoping to actually train potential future progressive Hindu religious leaders. To really there's very few progressive Hindu religious leaders currently that are there. Like they're obviously like exist and many of them are vocal, but like historically, the profession of being a priest or being a Hindu religious leader was restricted to Brahmins and mostly dominant caste background. So part of our effort with Samadarshini is to really try to democratize this knowledge of what progressive Hinduism is and try to create more progressive Hindu leadership. So now we're going on to talk about our membership programs. This is actually the very beginning of our membership drive. And we're going to be trying to encourage all of you to become official Hindus for Human Rights members. This is the link where you can join hindusforhumanrights.org/join. And as a member, here are some of the things that you can do. You can join or start a local HfHR chapter in your community, join or start a national working group or affinity group, access HfHR's community WhatsApp and membership calls, plus other members-only events and programs. We sometimes have, quite often actually, special classes that are only accessible for members. For example, Anantanand Rambachan did a Hindu liberation theology course that was only open to members. We're going to be offering a similar course in May, which is to be announced, but that'll only be open to members. So to access those opportunities, you have to be a member. You can connect with the community of fellow progressive, change-oriented Hindus, South Asians, and allies. Members who join at the $5 a month, that's the supporter level or above, will receive HfHR's beautiful progressive calendar for actually it's 2027, so that was a couple of years ago. And you can receive 15% off of HfHR merchandise. So that's our t-shirts and tote bags, pretty much. So this is just why membership is important. In order to really build progressive Hindu power, we need large numbers of members, and we need to show that we represent large numbers of people. And when we say, "Hey, we represent Hindus, and we have, so many members," like that actually helps us build our credibility in policy spaces, in the media, and advocacy spaces. It also helps build financial sustainability for HfHR. It allows HfHR to have a wide geographic presence across diverse communities. We are present in 32 states, and that's largely because our membership, and we're able to take action in so many places because we have strong geographic presence across the country. And our membership also ensures that HFHR's organizational priorities reflect our community. And like, we really want what we choose to focus on and what we do to be based on what our members want from us. And the more members we have, the more we're able to do that. So here are just the tiers of membership. So for student members, it's basically pay what you can. If you're like, I can only afford $1 a month, that's great. You can do that. Um, Most people will join at the supporter level or the friend level, so $5 a month. We really prefer monthly contributions rather than yearly contributions, but you can also choose 61 per year. The friend level, which is $11 per month or 101 per year. And there's a sustainer level, which is 51 per month or 251 per year. And there's also the possibility of a dues waiver if you email us and let us know what the situation is. And if you join HFHR, you can also be part of these many working groups or professional groups that we have as part of our community. And we basically have a WhatsApp community where we do a lot of our organizing of these working groups. But we have a liberation theology working group, a know your rights working group, which does the immigration work, a member organizing working group, recruiting new members. We have a few professional interest groups, including higher education, healthcare, students, and some affinity groups. So here are a few examples: Hindus for Justice in Palestine, LGBTQ+, and Charcha Reads, which is a book club. So these are all some of the communities and even networking opportunities you can join by being part of HFHR. So, who are our members? We just did our 2026 member survey. And if you look at this pie chart over here, you can kind of see the breakdown generationally of where our members are at. And we're extremely intergenerational. So, if you look at this pie chart, it's almost divided evenly. The biggest group is the 24 to 34 age range, but like almost every group, it's pretty much in that 15 or 10 to 20% range. So whether no matter how old you are, you have a community in HFHR. And we're also not all Hindu. 82% of our members are Hindu, identify as Hindu, but we also have a good amount, about 13% that aren't Hindu. Maybe they're Muslim or Christian. And we also have about 4% who are kind of, maybe they're like Hindu, born into Hindu families, but don't necessarily identify that way anymore. So we have that percentage. But we have many non-Hindu members, so you're absolutely welcome to join if you're not a Hindu. And our members are everywhere. As I mentioned, they're in 32 states, all of these states, including some you may not expect, plus 8 countries. So we do have our affiliates in UK and Australia, which are more official, but we do have members in Canada and France, Germany, Sweden, India, Singapore. And these are our official chapters. So, an official chapters is usually when we get like a pretty solid group of people and they want to meet regularly, we'll establish a chapter. And these are our chapters: South Bay Area, East Bay Area, Los Angeles, New York City, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Oregon, which is because we kind of rotate between 2 cities, Seattle, and Chicago. So now you've kind of heard about what our membership program entails, who are our members. So these are just some bonus perks that are just for the membership drive. The first 50 people who join as new members starting from today will get a copy of free, like basically with the membership, get a copy of Anantan and Rambachan's new book, The Way of the Sant. And I'm really excited. I just got my copy to prepare for next week's Betak, and I'm very excited to read it. And he's a great if you just want to learn more about Hindu liberation theology or progressive Hinduism, all his work is really amazing. And this is our next event, which is a webinar. So our March Betak, Sant Virtues for Our Times, and it'll be next Saturday at 12 Eastern. And I'll be in conversation with Anant Ji talking about his new book. So if you sign up early, you can get a free book. And the other perk is if you join at the friend level, so that's the $11 a month or higher level, you can receive an HfHR tote bag. And so these are what they look like. You can get it in English and it says peace, justice, truth, or you can also get it in Sanskrit and it'll say Shanti Nyaya Satya. But if you join at that middle tier higher, we'll send you a free tote bag. And this is at any point throughout the membership drive. So here is the link to join as a member and a QR code. We'll put it in the chat so it's a little bit easier for you to grab. But with that, we will stop sharing and now we'll take questions. Um, so let's just see what we have. So the first question is just, will we be sending out copies of the PPT? Uh, Probably not, but we will likely post the video onto YouTube. So you'll get it through that way. The next question is HfHR involved with the Parliament of the World's Religions? Yes, we are very involved when it happens. The last one that happened was 2023. And we were present and we actually gave four panels. We sponsored four panels. And off the top of my head, one of them was about religious minorities in Pakistan, Afghanistan. One of them was about like virtue in Hinduism, and we were on some panels as well. One of them was about like Hindu phobia and kind of concerns about like being a Hindu minority while also um how that interacts with Hindu nationalism. So we regularly participate at the Parliament of World Religions. The next question is, how are you distinguishing between who agrees with Hindu nationalist narratives versus card-carrying members of Hindu nationalism? Maybe Vivek or Ria, do you want to take that?
I think we all know people or have people in our communities who might buy into Hindu nationalism. And I think it's important for us to create space to have conversations with them, but also make it clear that we stand on our values of pluralism and against the kind of exclusive, extreme ethno-nationalism that is embodied by a lot of Hindu nationalists and the harm that it does.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is we lead with our values, right? We believe in a version of Hinduism that is equitable and anti-caste. And so like and not Islamophobic, not hateful of other religious communities and against religious nationalism. And then I think we start from there and you kind of find the people and you have the conversations that Vivek is talking about who is kind of a card carrying member of Hindu nationalism and who is not, and has bought in, who has somehow supported these narratives. And a lot of those people are movable, and it all happens in the relationships we build, and especially the organizing team builds. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
another,
I'll add one other thing to that, which is obviously we're concerned about Hindu nationalism and caste, and we're also building a progressive Hindu community for people who are against those things, but also who are progressive and want to find a home with other Hindus. So a lot of our work is explicitly working against Hindu nationalism or caste. But as Shravya and Ria have shown, we're also building a community of progressive Hindus in the diaspora. I think for a lot of Hindus, Here, they may have a political identity of progressive values, and their background and faith practice as Hindus are both really important to them. But it can be hard to find spaces where both of those things are celebrated and welcomed and have a community of other people who are like that. So I just want to also make that clear that when we're talking about Hindu nationalism, we're talking about caste, those are really important conversations and work that we engage in. But that's also not all that we do and offer.
So another question we have is, what does an official chapter do? Yeah, maybe Vivek, you can talk about this more.
Yeah, so we have chapters around the country, and there's really a wide range of things that we do. Right now, the Bay Area chapter has a reading and discussion group for the Bhagavad Gita. So we're meeting every other week to discuss chapters of the Bhagavad Gita and what we can take away from it as progressive Hindus. Um, a lot of our chapters have engaged in cultural celebrations, like Shravya mentioned, the Easter event in Oregon. We do Diwali celebrations around the country, including in New York and the Bay Area. Um, we've also engaged in political advocacy on issues that are important to us. So here in the Bay Area, for example, we've had our members show up and testify in support of ethnic studies. Um, and yeah, so there's a wide range of issues. We've held film screenings, most recently of the film Homebound, which was India's submission to the Oscars uh, last year. And so there's not really any limit to like what different chapters can do. It's really led by what the people in those chapters are interested in doing together.
And there are a few questions about HfHR action, which we're not going to talk about here. But if you just look up HfHR action, or Ria, maybe you could talk about what they can do if they want to learn more about it.
If you want to learn more about HfHR Action, you can, I'll have Mayank share my email maybe afterwards. Um, and yeah, you can send me an email. We have a WhatsApp community as well that is burgeoning. Um, and I think the three things I can say, and we can say this here. A lot of what we're doing right now are like candidate endorsements. That's not something that HfHR is allowed to do. It's not allowed to talk about elections, and only in the US. There are very limited lobbying things. It's mostly like signing on to the anti-war movement against Iran right now, and um, uh, lobbying around like the funding for or not funding ICE and CBP. Um, Hopefully that answered that question, but please email me. My uncle will share, or my uncle Savia will share my HFHR action email after.
So, someone asked, I'm located in Wisconsin. How can we find out if there's a chapter near us, and what options are there if there is no chapter nearby? So, you're welcome to email us. You all have the info email. I think most of you who registered will have my email as well. So you can always let us ask us if there's a chapter, and we can tell you. If there's no chapter, we can always help you create a chapter, especially if there's enough people in your area. Some places, like I think Idaho, we only have one member, so it doesn't really like make sense for them to have a chapter yet. But there's some places where there's quite a few members, and they might live in a concrete area, and we can help you do that work to start building. And like another part of building a chapter is like this is a really good time to reach out to people that you know who might have similar politics, or maybe you've never broached the conversation before. But during this membership drive, we're really trying to get folks who support us to reach out to the people that they know and ask them, hey, I'm part of this organization called Hindus for Human Rights. Do you want to become a member? And that's a really great way to create your local chapter. And when it's built on your personal relationships, the work of organizing it's just a lot more fun too. So both fun and effective.
And to directly answer the question, we don't have a chapter right now in Wisconsin. I think there was a question also about one in Houston, but we do have members in both places. So if that is something that you are interested in getting involved in, we can definitely support that.
Yeah. How can you find out whether you are officially a member? You can ask us if you're donating monthly at the $5 amount, you are a member. So we also have a sort of member by default, whereas some people might donate at the the level that the minimum level for becoming a member is the $51 or higher. So if you do that, we treat you as a member by default, which means that you get the calendar and you get our membership perks, even if you don't officially register as a member. Um, let's see what else. Oh, is there any guidance on how to broach this topic with others, in particular elders? It can sometimes be intimidating to bring up certain topics with others, even if we feel they agree with our politics. Maybe Vivek or Ria.
Yeah, I think, this is a challenge that I think a lot of us have been through is how to have some of these difficult conversations. And we're actually developing resources, including a pretty extensive course specifically on this that I think is going to be launched later this summer. But briefly, what I'll say that can be helpful is um, trying to understand what's behind the questions or the views that people have. So sometimes, for example, those questions might be rooted in safety, feeling that there are threats to Hindus or to the Hindu community and not feeling safe. And so in that conversation, you could really get to the bottom of why it is that they're feeling that way, and have more of a conversation about it. Of course, there are also times when you can, rebut arguments, especially bad faith arguments, with facts. And also, I think that what the research shows is that it's helpful to have more of a conversation, to listen, and to really try to understand, ask a lot of questions about why someone feels that way and what is really underlying their concerns, while standing firm by your values and keeping the conversation rooted in facts. So I hope that that's helpful. There we are developing more resources on how to do this. I know it's something that's very common, and that a lot of people struggle with or face as a challenge.
And a lot of people reach out to us wanting those resources and kind of to work on this. So it's something that we're actively building out. So I'm gonna kind of combine two questions. There's a question on how you're helping Hindu causes and Hindu threats. And there's another question of we're perceived as talking only about Hindu nationalists, and being a voice or for the protection of Muslims, but not as much for minorities, like in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Like, what is HFHR doing this to take this on head on? So maybe Ria, you can share about, what we're doing to protect Hindus in other South Asian countries and even India.
Yeah, so our approach on Bangladesh and Pakistan is very much the same approach we have when it comes to India, right? We want to be credible voices for people living in those places. So in Pakistan, this has been really about we've started building almost like a Pakistan program that is quite robust. It's getting quite robust at this point. There are a few things that we've been talking about. Um, and the reason we've talked about these things first, by the way, is to establish our credibility, because these are the biggest human rights issues. The first is on political prisoners in Pakistan. Um, there are people that we've now been in contact with or have been working with who are now in jail, as well as people we've been advocating for. A lot of this has been in Balochistan, which is um, the part of Pakistan where you have the most acute human rights issues, and these human rights issues um, really point to what is systemically wrong or systemically going wrong in Pakistan today, which is cultural majoritarianism, as well as the strength of the military, oftentimes at the cost of um, the civilian government, civilian rights, and oftentimes in cooperation with the US. So we've been working with Baloch groups on human rights issues there. We've also been talking about not Kashmir, what's happening in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa with Pashtun groups, Pashtun human rights issues, because that is directly related to what is happening between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Again, there's a lot of like history and institutional issues in Pakistan that inform their policy towards KP. And this is all then kind of the foundation, because then we can start talking about Hindus being forcibly converted in Sindh province, or minority rights in Sindh, women's rights across Pakistan. If we go in and we don't sound Pakistani, we will endanger a lot of the people that we want to help in Pakistan, especially because we were perceived as an Indian group to so many Pakistanis. And there are a lot of Pakistani people that we work with who are worried to come out publicly to say that we're their partners or to have us platform them because their safety will be compromised if they are seen working with a quote unquote Indian group, even though we are trying to emphasize that we're a South Asian Hindu group. Um, so some of that work in especially in Pakistan is happening in the background. We have to be really careful about it, to not endanger a lot of those communities, including Hindus in Pakistan. In Bangladesh, it's a little bit different. So Bangladesh, we were the only Hindu group to work with Bangladeshi groups to get reform, Bangladeshi American groups to get reforms to a bill to recognize the 1971 genocide in Bangladesh. And our goal was to make sure that this was done on the terms of Bangladeshis and Hindu Bangladeshis, both in the US and in Bangladesh. During the July Revolution and the overthrow of the Sheikh Hasina government, we've been really careful to make sure, on one hand, we're holding the like dreams of secular democracy of so many of the students during the revolution itself, on one hand, and taking into account the demands of Hindu Bangladeshis at the time, um, and still to this day of what they wanted to see for a new Bangladesh. And so we've been consistently advocating for those things alongside Hindu Bangladeshi groups rather than kind of, again, to sound really, really Bangladeshi and like Hindu Bangladeshis rather than to sound like Indians who care about what's happening in Bangladesh. Again, this is something we take very, very seriously because it affects the safety and the livelihoods and the rights of people living in Bangladesh. And that is an approach that we will take in Sri Lanka. It is an approach that we want to make sure that we are always taking, that we can be a credible Hindu voice wherever we are. Yeah.
Thanks, Ria. There was a question as well about what other similar organizations or faith groups we work with. And we do work very closely with a number of them, Jewish Voice for Peace, the Sikh Coalition, SALDEF, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, Indian American Muslim Council. So we work regularly with groups representing folks from other religions here in the Bay Area. We work closely with the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, which does a lot of great interfaith organizing on justice issues.
And I think another part of that question was what organizations you work with that are kind of similar to ours in terms of religious communities kind of trying to address systems of oppression or social justice issues within their faith traditions. And we do work with those. So Muslims for Progressive Values is a close partner. They're working on challenging, issues of discrimination, oppression within the Muslim community. We have Jewish Voice for Peace that's working on challenging Zionism. We also work with a lot of organizations that are addressing Christian nationalism, Interfaith Alliance as an example. We really try to work with groups that have a similar mindset toward ours in terms of addressing challenges that come within faith communities. So then there's a question about how active is HfHR with respect to white Christian nationalism? And specifically, are there HfHR members in Minnesota who are engaging with the erosion of US democracy and Trumpism? So we are very active on the issue of white Christian nationalism. It's increasingly becoming a priority as Indians and Hindus are, as well as other religious minority communities are being attacked by Christian nationalists. We've been paying close attention to what's been happening in Dallas as well. And in Minnesota specifically, we have been increasingly engaged. We have a smaller group of people out there, but they're increasingly interested in becoming involved. We might see a chapter there soon, actually. But our executive director, Sunitha, went to Minneapolis during the height of basically around, I think, slightly before Alex Preddy was killed, because there was a call to religious leaders to come to Minneapolis and stand up against ICE and partake in a lot of the actions there. And so she went there and really engaged with a lot of faith groups. And so we're addressing this both through the immigration route in terms of addressing how our community is being affected by, anti-immigrant sentiment. We are on lawsuits. For example, we're on a lawsuit right now challenging the fact that the White House Religious Liberty Commission doesn't have any Hindus or religious minorities. And so we are active in that fight, and we will always speak out when there was, for example, in Texas, people protesting with these anti-Diwali signs in Texas, and we spoke out against that. So we'll always speak out against white Christian nationalism. And then there's another question. Will you be open to collaborating with Hindu groups you disagree with on issues you both agree on? Um, so, well, we have a program called Desh Videsh in which we sometimes will have conversations basically with individuals or organizations who we might have some disagreement on in an area where maybe there's like some difference of opinion, but maybe there's some reasonable good faith on both sides. Like an example of this is we did a conversation about the issue of Hindu phobia with some folks who we don't agree with on a lot of things. And we did that conversation because we felt like it was important to address the challenges religious minorities are facing, especially in the context of white Christian nationalism, but also to dismantle the idea um, that Hindus are facing kind of a unique threat that other religious communities aren't facing. And so we engage in that conversation, but it's very case by case because while we do want to engage, with people who think differently from us and have those difficult conversations, we also don't want to be platforming people who, frankly, have very hateful ideologies against Muslims, against Dalit people, against other religious minorities. So we'll work with people who we may not agree on everything with, but it really depends on how much they respect our partners and the people that we're trying to advocate for. So I think we may have time for just one more question. Um, so maybe this is a question. Has there been any outreach to the North American Association of Indian Students to work with Indian student associations on college campuses? Maybe not that specifically, but I think Vivek, maybe you can talk about some of the student organizing we've done.
Yeah, we are starting to build student chapters at universities around the country. That's still in process. And we do have a lot of student members as well. So that's definitely something we're interested in. I don't think we have worked with that specific group. But if they're aligned on our values, we could definitely would be happy to talk with them and see where we can collaborate. Oh, I think you're
Um,
muted.
So, I think that that is pretty much all of the questions that we're going to have time to answer today. But thank you all for coming to the open house. Please join as HFHR members, and you can check out our website or go to the link that's in the chat if you want to join. Always feel free to reach out. I'll put our info email right here if you have additional questions. And thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
To see more of you soon.